I've just been seeing fucking double numbers, triple numbers everywhere, and it's like the
Mm,
more energy I place on that, the more I see it. But coming both of us coming from that pickup background where, like, at one point it was talking about how, like, you if you just train your mind to see these things, you're just going to see it, you know? It's like name all the red things in the room, but now close your eyes and tell me what was yellow, and you can't do it. And so part of me is like, okay, well, this is kind of a new agey trip where we're just looking for meaning in things that don't necessarily have it. And we're just seeing it more, and now we're just giving it more weight. The other half is I can't turn my head without seeing one of these numbers. And so it's like constantly like, is there some sort of communication coming through, and trying to
mm.
trying to see that out. But I guess my question to you is, do you feel like there's any sort of validity to this? Have you had any experiences with these kinds of things? Should I even bother to, run down this road?
Mm. Yeah, well, it's a common question because it does happen to a lot of people. So if anything's like this is happening to a lot of people, especially those who are, going through what seems like a process of awakening, it's a valid question and inquiry, and it's something to explore in a sense. Like, well, what is this, right? Like, why is it arising? And I know in my experience, I think it was when I was 16, I started seeing numbers, and I was seeing 444 all the time, and I'd wake up to it. I would see it on the clocks. I'd see it on. I think we had computers, but I forget. I was seeing it everywhere, and then I remember asking my mom. I'm like, Mom, like, what does this mean? I keep seeing this number, and of course, she didn't really know or have an ability to answer that at the time. But so then like that kind of went away for a couple years, and then it came back, especially in my initial period of opening up, and it just kind of continued to snowball, right? And so obviously when we're asking the question, like, does something have meaning, a lot of times what we're really asking is like, well, like, how does this benefit me? Like, when we're looking for meaning, we're looking for that feeling of purpose, or feeling like, my life has meaning, or there's some direction that I'm needing to take, and there's this kind of like movie like awe that emerges with that. And so, I mean, that's a beautiful thing, right? Like, we're seeking that sense of purpose and meaning, and I feel that's why we're here in a human body. Now, where it becomes imbalanced is when we kind of get into that addictive cycle where, yeah, everything we're seeking is, every is some external form of meaning. Like, we need this external validation, and oftentimes that emerges in many things. That could be social media, that could be just, like having some romantic interests, or foods and all this stuff. Like, there's just all forms of external validation to kind of make us feel good. So that's very quickly what the synchronicity topic can at times turn into, right? Where there's kind of this yeah, subtle kind of addictive energy towards the need for like a synchronicity to pop up, something to show that there's something happening, right? Um,
Right.
so that's where it can then result in, yeah, like this kind of endless looking for what's around the corner. Where's the next synchronicity? And kind of using that as a way to as the only way to kind of validate one's experience. And so it's kind of just a process of maturity a little bit, where, yeah, you're probably going to go through that phase where it's just new and interesting. So it's like, okay, all these things are popping up, and you're seeing these different numbers, and or these messages, or the animals, or and you're seeing that, okay, well, there is some sort of pattern here that's happening, and the patterns are certainly giving messages to something. Like, there's something being revealed to me in these experiences where I'm observing my reality in a more objective way. I'm starting to see from a farther back lens that what's arising is not just a product of coincidence, or just this kind of meaningless symbol. It's very much a metaphor, or a symbol of some sort of message. So in a certain sense, then that kind of matures into starting to read the code a little bit, right? So if you go on some of these sites that give meanings of certain numbers, there's different ones. I mean, they're all somewhat similar. I haven't gone into it in a while. Now it's kind of etched in my mind. I kind of have an understanding of what each number kind of means. Not all the combinations, but the main ones. Um, and then you start to see it like a code, where you can start to notice, well, say you're thinking a certain thought or you're having a certain conversation, and then you see a number at that time. You kind of start to see that, oh yeah, like there is a certain code like nature to this, right? And there's in a sense, um there's something there, there is something kind of revealing itself. But at the same time, there isn't necessarily, it's just being mindful of that natural tendency for the mind to just be then constantly looking for the next one, right? Because certainly, yeah, we do co-create reality, and then we will shift to see, what we want to see. But the key element with that perspective, because that's obviously the argument for anyone who say like on the opposite side of things, who think everything's random, or they think, I don't know, like, all the shit like of 2020, everything is real, everything, like all this kind of stuff. So their common argument would be, oh well, these other people are just, yeah, they're just in echo chambers and shit like that. Well, the reality is we're all in echo chambers, because we're only ever going to be in a mirror of our own vibratory or oscillation, like whatever, wherever we're oscillating at, that's all we're ever going to see anyways. So of course we're in an echo chamber. That's how the universe works. So it's recognizing that as long as we're not getting attached to ideas and concepts, and we're willing to be flexible and fluid, but yet at the same time, in that flexibility and fluidness, we also see what's real. It's like seeing, oh, like, we love child, but we don't kill child. You know what I mean? Like, it's
You'd
not,
hope.
you know what I mean? It's not like an echo chamber. It's a fucking natural law. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, yeah.
So that's kind of the same way I see, spirit totems of animals, numbers, but you'll start to notice that, I mean, the universe is coded by numbers. So number is really powerful because it really is like a code. And as you start to really, just be open to see it, you'll start to be able to read things like a code, like you'll start to see when things arise. And for me now, it's because what happened for me, it was like, okay, years ago started seeing it, and then you start seeing it every couple of months, and then every couple of weeks, and every couple hours, and every couple, like minutes literally, you start to recognize, wait a minute, like everything is synchronistic, because everything in my reality is meant to be there in this moment in time. And because it's meant to be there, quote unquote, it has meaning. It doesn't mean it's like, oh, like, this means I'm gonna get enlightened tomorrow, or this means I'm gonna ascend to some planet like on Thursday. It's not like this kind of glamorous concept, although it can be, who knows. Um, it's just that you see it as an everyday part of your reality. It's like, oh, I have a hand, it's like, it's nothing, but it's great, I have a
Yeah.
hand. But so that's kind of the same way. So you'll go through whatever phase you're going through. It's just to kind of give you a bird's eye view of, that's kind of the progression that I've noticed, at least with myself and most people, where yeah, you're, and the thing is the more you're doing authentic like self-inquiry and practicing on like what is the actual source of being, meaning like the source of being is myself, and I'm the one that's giving life to these synchronicities. It's not happening to me necessarily, right? It's manifesting from my own expression. So from that perspective, that's the real empowering way to view that, in my view, because then you embrace the synchronicities, because you start to see them more. Like I said, you literally start to see them like all the time, in all forms, not just numbers, right? And then as you do that, you're not thinking anything of it, but because you're not attached and thinking anything of it per se, that's where you actually get the message, right? Like you're like, oh, you really can read. It's kind of like, I don't know, trying to do a reading for yourself, or trying to like really authentically tune into whether something's correct for you or not. It's
Hmm.
like, well, you can't, well, you can, but it's best to not have preconceived notions about whether you want to do it or not, or this or that. Like, you want to empty so that you can really get to the bottom of, is this correct or is this not, versus my own projections upon it that are saying, oh, this is going to be good or not, or you know what I mean. um that's the kind of balanced approach there, because yeah, it's very quick that we can just be endlessly looking for meaning, and although there is a certain truth to it, it's like it's kind of like what's happened in 2020. You have all these, people getting into conspiracy stuff and all that, and the premise behind the majority of it is true. It's just that when you get into a place where it's kind of this imbalanced addiction to the next thing, then you're not detailed enough in it. You start generalizing things too much, and then that's where you get kind of the label of some wacky conspiracy theorist, because you look like one. You're not grounded in the realities of certain things, and although the premise may be true, it doesn't mean everything that's appearing is the exact thing that you think it is.
Hmm.
um so that's the kind of best way, is just being balanced with it, and yeah, sure, certainly, like, exploring the I mean, I still do that. If I see certain animals, I haven't memorized what every animal means, but the funny thing is, as you start to really tune into it and you start to really like go inwards first, before, like, say, like looking on Google or something like that, and you start to really feel into like what's actually being revealed based on maybe what you were thinking in that moment, or what's happening in your life experience, whatever, you'll start to have a clear sense on what's really being mirrored to you in that messaging, right?
Hmm.
um, because it's you anyway, so you should know, like it is only going to reflect who you already are, what you already are. And then you go on Google and you search, like, what does the crow mean, or like, whatever, or some dream symbol or something, and oftentimes you'll start to notice, like, they will match up, or there'll be some one passage that just stands out to you and be like, yeah, that's it, like, that's what I'm feeling, it makes so much sense, right? um, so it's all a product of various forms of kind of divination, like tarot, and I don't know, I still read cards sometimes, like playing cards, that
Yeah.
that that always is fun, because it does give a certain, it just gives a mirror to your energetic field, right? And it's almost always accurate, because again, you're not seeing it as something separate, right? You know that everything that's manifesting in your field of view is a mirror of your frequency. So whatever's arising is just going to be a product of that. So as you're deepening into the realities of vibration and sound and light, and the true essence of who you are, well, then everything in your reality will then continue to manifest that, right? So I mean, yeah, it's an echo chamber, but like we said, it's coming into alignment with truth, not like falsehood. So the laws are the same. Someone who's in a bunch of delusion, they're going to be in their own echo chamber too. It's just going to be a very unpleasant one.
Hmm.
So so yeah, that's what I got on that. I mean, I was pretty into that for a while, just understanding the numbers and things like that. But I got carried away, at times you kind of look everywhere. And because the thing is too is, I do find this can be a tendency with, like, if you're smoking a decent amount of weed too, because it makes you kind of heady sometimes. I mean, depends what weed you're smoking, but like it is a very head centric way of living, when everything's being analyzed through the mind, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
just being cognizant of that tendency of, if you notice that happening, but because it is very much a feeling sense, where you're in a certain state, and then numbers or something pops up, some symbology, and you're like, oh yeah, like that's a good confirmation, right? So because confirmation, I mean, that's very much why I do these sessions. It's like confirmation is a really powerful element on the path, because, it's like we know most of the things we need to know in every moment, but to have things confirmed, it helps with the trust, and trusting in ourselves and that kind of thing, right? But yeah.
Awesome. I'm
Yeah,
gonna pull the cannabis thing over, put it right here for a moment.
sure.
Yeah. So basically, you're confirming everything I'm doing. To me, all the numbers to me is just a wink from the universe. It's just like, hey, I
Mhm.
see you. It's like not any. Sometimes it's not even to be read. It's just to be like, hey, are you awake?
Yep.
See me? And so, like, for me, almost guaranteed, I always find a heads up dime.
Mm.
And like, yeah, I for sure went onto the internet. What does it mean? Like, what I find heads up dimes everywhere. It's like, is grandpa trying to connect with me? And at the end of the day, like, I mean, the logical side of me says it's the smallest piece of currency we own. Most people, if they drop a dime, probably aren't going to take the time to pick it up. And there's a 50-50 chance of it landing on a head. So the other side is, Grandpa, is it you? But for me, like you say, it's balancing that sort of, oh, this is fun, but also like, dude, this is not the be all end all. This is just a wink from the other person saying, hey, good job, keep going.
Mhm.
And for
Ye-
me, the number yesterday was like 3737. So the ascended masters are happy with your progress,
mm,
and so for me it's always just, you're on the right path, keep doing what you're doing, keep the blinders on, just keep
yeah.
going. So that's basically where I'm at with the angel numbers right now.
Yeah, well, one thing too that I'd suggest, like as a foundation with it is, because I know the angel number piece you're speaking of, and uh, and yeah, like you can notice how you can go through that whole book, and it's like every single one is some like epically positive message from the universe. So a more practical way to navigate that is actually just to like briefly study just numerology, not in any sort of like crazy complexity, but just understanding like what does 0 to 9 mean, because that's
Mhm.
how it generally works. Find like a real grounded kind of numerology type of article or something. I don't have anything on the top of my head, but I'm sure you'll find it. Just what are the main numbers from 0 to 9, and then just start working with that instead of the angel number ones, because you'll notice it'll just be more practical, and it's kind of the code thing will make more sense to you. Like for instance, if I was seeing 3737, I would generally deduce that down. Like 37 in numerology, you usually add the numbers together and then you deduce it. So it's like 3 plus 7 is 10, and then it's 1 plus 0 is 1. So the one would have like the core meaning generally in that
Mm,
instance. And then if it's showing up together, maybe you can make that as an 11, or it comes down to 2. But you'll start to notice that will have more of a consistent more of a consistency
mhm.
in your understanding of things. So if I'm seeing, yeah, longer numbers in different forms, or that's what I had trained myself to do back then. I was just like an instant kind of little calculation that would happen, and then I would kind of uncover whatever. I mean, angel numbers are good too, but you can kind of see the new aginess in it a bit, which is again fine. But yeah, it's just another method that I've used in the past, just having a base understanding of numerology and then just kind of working with that.
I tend to trust the divine numerology a little bit more. It's been around longer than than angel number meanings. I would hazard a guess at least.
Yeah, yeah, correct.
So the older it is, the more potential for truth, I would say.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah.
um, just picking up on the weed topic for a bit, because I know like in videos you've talked about how like you used to smoke weed, you gave it up, you don't believe it really has a place necessarily um, in spirituality, perhaps. For myself, I run a weed shop. I smoke weed. Um, I've definitely gone through various parts of my life where I can definitely tell you it's debilitating. It's distracting. It's not advantageous. It doesn't make you more creative if you don't use it right. But I can also argue that as someone who's like used it for quite a long time and come to a place with it where I'm not necessarily, I don't think I'm addictive towards it. I can say no to it. I can go days without touching it, but I can also, uh, I've had nice long meditation sessions where I've started off with, like an indica or something, just to like keep me in my place, because I tend to be crazy in the mind sometimes. So
Mm.
um, I guess I just wanted to like touch base on like whether there is it like a cut and dry, like, this will, if this is in your system, this will not, really help you on your path to enlightenment. I personally think as humans, we have an endocannabinoid system in our body. We've been interacting with it for centuries. There is a place for it, um, but it has to be used like a tool. It can't be used like the angel numbers. You can't be looking for meaning in it. Like, oh well, if I smoke this joint, I'll have the answers. I
Hmm.
think I think like the angel numbers, it's like it's nice, but it is just a piece of the puzzle. It is nothing close to the answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's a vast topic. It's good that you're asking the question at least. I mean, that's it shows the willingness to explore the different perspectives because I do find like the psychedelic community is really rooted in their perspectives and whatever. And obviously, it's coming from a certain level of experience because when we go into these psychedelic experiences or we use the plants in certain ways, I mean, yeah, one could definitely argue the elevation that arises in their experience that feels they're, opening up to other realms or, new avenues of thought. And I mean, I do have a compassion for that in regards to the fact that our Western world is just so ridden with such high levels of suffering, in our current experience and our past experience, whatever. And so sometimes like those kind of real and more intensive tools, they help kind of crack open the armor a little bit. And because there's so much that many of us have worn for a long time, consciously or unconsciously, then these tools can be in that regard supportive. And that's kind of how I've looked at my own path with them, where one could argue that, yeah, if I didn't have some of my initial out of body experiences, maybe I wouldn't have gone down the path I've gone down, or come to the place I've come to. So I definitely understand that. However, at the same time, I mean, I've gone into many extremes in my life, obviously, and those extremes as a three, bring me many different lessons that maybe most people would not come into. And so going into so many different plant ceremonies and a lot of it with marijuana, I've experienced a whole I mean it would take me a lifetime to talk about all the things I've experienced in those sessions. And the full gambit of closed-eyed journeys, open-eyed superpowers activating. I mean, the whole shebang. And during that period, which was about 3 to 4 years of real intense use and specifically spiritually oriented use, that was a very eye-opening period where on one end I was given the opening or the doorway to what I had thought was enlightenment or awakening or an activation of just aspects of myself that I had previously never considered. And even way beyond that, I'd say what even the more common spiritual seeker would never really even come into. So that was really beautiful. And then at the same time, I experienced the energetic exchange with that, right? And I've talked about that in some of my videos about it, is like there is a debt to pay. There is an exchange that we have with everything. So
Hmm.
when it comes to psychedelics, for instance, if we're having these real blown out experiences or kundalini awakenings or whatever, well, there will be some sort of debt to pay in that sense, because whatever you're gaining or attaining especially in an energetic level, there that there is no shortcut. There will be something that will have to be exchanged for that. And generally what's exchanged on the most practical level is your energies from your liver and your kidneys. Many of your organ systems are drained when you're going into these experiences. So yes, the brain and the cannabinoids and everything in the higher experience is opening up, but the lower dimensions of your body, and this does relate to the chakra system, are in a sense being damaged, because the exchange of energy is really strong. So if someone's still on it and still using, then I would generally point them to, if they were considering it, to be microdosing or to be really lowering the dosage, because that won't be as strong. And I spoke about it in my psychedelic video, but I have a friend I've been sharing Dr. Jiri's work. I don't know if you looked at it yet, but he has a podcast on this specifically, and it definitely echoes everything I've learned about it, in regards to the more scientific element of DNA compaction, we call, where the psychedelic plants have a tendency to to create something what's called DNA compaction, which is basically where the kind of best metaphor I use, you know, it's almost like if you were to plug your computer right into the telephone pole, you know, like the energy is just too much. So if you did that, it would probably fry your computer, right?
Yeah.
So when we think about or look into the topics of DNA compaction, we're basically looking at the lower strands of our DNA being, in a sense, compacted or, in a sense, crushed from the higher oscillation frequencies that are accessed in some of these experiences. That on the surface, yeah, they look amazing, they feel amazing, they, you know, they give us those reference points. That was often what my rationalization behind it was. Is like, oh, I'm getting a reference point to what I can naturally build up to, which sure we could say is what happened. However, the damage that I had to work through some of these experiences were quite extreme, you know. And I wouldn't say everybody gets that when they work with it, especially if it's more of a casual use or something where they're not activating such high intense amounts of energy, because that's what I was doing. So the repercussions were very severe in my case, and I'm still dealing with it. But that element, so that element is one side, right? You know, can we do it in a balanced way and something that's more mindful? You know, possibly. I think certainly with the technologies of chaotic science and some of the other, you know, tools I've presented, they can set your energy body up. And Dr. Jerry speaks of this also because he's affiliated with that work, where the use of those plants will not have, you know, as much of a detrimental effect, or it will be nullified to a certain degree, because you're activating your, you know, higher strand oscillation or your higher avatar state in a natural way first and foremost, and then the plants maybe are used in a secondary, you know, approach. So that's something that is kind of, you know, up for question, obviously, if that will help nullify it. But I certainly could see the potential of that because, yeah, you're kind of doing your protective work, and there's a grounded nature to the interaction with the plants and this type of thing. And that's where it kind of gets into a gray area, right? Where people then have to decide upon themselves and kind of really come into a cognition of their own energy body and how things are affecting them. At the time when I was using it, I wasn't adept enough to know. Actually, on the subtle level, I knew that there was something wrong with what was happening. But on the other layer, it was just so powerful. Like there was just so much power that I was activating in these experiences that I couldn't justify not using them. So whether that was an addiction or not, who knows? But there was this kind of tendency to just keep going down that route, right? And I had my lessons to learn in that regard. Now, the other side to it is, you know, the entity discussion. I started talking about it, you know, just the past couple of days. A lot of people asking questions and things, but you know, in the majority of my psychedelic periods, that's when I had the most amount of uh, uninvited channeling experiences, entity attacks, sexual entity attacks, and demonic possession. All of those were, I wouldn't say, well, for periods of time they were common, and then other periods of time, you know, not as much. But that's when it was most intense. And although it still happened after that, in those periods it was most intense. And that could be in just like a ceremony, like a specific ritual I was doing, or that could have been just in me just smoking up and then noticing the tendencies of how these entities interplay with relationships and how they attack on certain angles of weak points. And I mean, you know, I'm writing all kinds of stuff about it because I had so many experiences and run-ins with this that really started getting me questioning like what the fuck was going on, you know.
Hmm.
So that's obviously not a common topic even for the common person who's in spirituality and, you know, smoking weed or, you know, doing ayahuasca. Like people don't talk about it much because they don't really understand it or they haven't experienced it directly, or, you know, they're not aware of what's going on there. But I just continued to become more and more aware of these synchronicities, literally, of things that were happening and when I was using that, um that just was really not right. It wasn't correct. It didn't feel resonant, you know. And then when I wasn't using, although I had to go through like a lot of withdrawal symptoms, and I felt like I wasn't able to access these higher abilities anymore. It made me very depressed for a period, you know, because I became so, in a sense, reliant on them. But but I also started to notice I wasn't getting attacked as much. I wasn't having these run-ins with these beings, as often. So that was a positive sign, and that is one of the bigger topics I talk about with it, because when you're using the plant, there is tendency at times for holes to be ripped in your aura field, and when those auras, the aura field is ripped, then that's where the entry of those beings can come in, right? So again, if you don't have an awareness of your energy body and things like that, you won't really be able to kind of draw that conclusion. It won't be as clear. At the same time, like I said, if you're well on the path and you've deepened in a certain process, then that won't be as common, because the power of the energy you're connecting to within yourself is strong. So whatever you're using or drinking alcohol or this, it's not going to have as detrimental of an effect. I certainly am in alignment with that. Um,
Hmm.
but then it comes to a point, like at a certain point, it's kind of like a leaf falling off a tree, like we've spoken about, right? Where I'm not telling people like you have to stop. I kind of, in my experience, I recognize my life is better in every possible way without them. Similar to not smoking, similar to not having as much sex, like there's a lot of things that my life has changed. Whereas before, yeah, sure, they were great things. They were fun. They felt good, but
Hmm.
it's just a certain stage that you may go through. So the other thing, and I've talked about this in my video too, was that every one of my like real prominent teachers on my path that I really respected, and they generally were a bit older, every single one of them was pretty adamant that I wasn't using when I was working with them. So that was another kind of like signpost. I'm like, well, I mean, they're offering a
Yeah.
lot here, like there's a lot of progress I'm making with them. Like I'm engaging in these teachings and it's really working. So, it's kind of like, well, how do I justify this? And obviously the psychedelic community is a lot younger, right? Most of them. So we have this youngness. We're really in that. So these older teachers who are like, oh well, maybe they don't know or whatever, but at the same time, I think there's a certain maturity there that they may have come to about that, right? So that was a pretty clear piece. I watched a video not too long ago, maybe a year ago or so, about, I think it was Sadhguru. He had a, I don't follow much anymore, but he had a video about psychedelics and that, and he talked about the cannabinoid topic, because I researched that. Obviously that's a big one, and he was saying, and this is similar to some of their teachings about fasting, where the cannabinoids in your system, everything in your system that's made is not necessarily for something from the outside to come in and give that, but for something inside that you can create. And I've experienced this in my fasting and breath work and meditations, where, and like likely you have too, it's like we can experience those states without the tools, right? And accessing, like creating the cannabinoids in your brain is possible, through breath work, through fasting, through meditation. And that's always what it's been. But of course we have tools sometimes outside to maybe give a mirror, or someone could obviously justify that it's to activate those things, but he was sharing it from that perspective, which I definitely am in alignment with. Um, and one of the last pieces that's interesting that maybe most won't really consider as well, but it's pretty clear to me, and through my studies and through just coming into different teachings, that cannabis is not native to this planet. It's actually from Nibiru, which is the Anunnaki planet. It's the 12th planet. And the Anunnaki energy is very strong in Canada, actually, particularly. But that plant has been claimed to come from that, with a bunch of other plants, like tomatoes and carrots, and there's other things too. But that was interesting to me, because I do personally know that I have some Anunnaki coding, which isn't a good or bad thing. It is what it is. So sometimes people with different coding, like especially when you get into the race line discussion, certain people with certain coding will be more attracted to certain tools, right? So somebody who has a certain coding that's not like that Anunnaki based, and I know people like in my life, like my ex-fiance Raina, like we would smoke back in the day and she would have like no experience, whereas me, I'm like going off, like I'm going in some other dimension, and she would, like, it would just do nothing. It would, like, she would basically have no experience to it. And I never understood that until later, where I started to grasp the concept of having certain coding, where you may have a past with the plant, you may have a certain history with it, where when you engage with it, it activates that history, it activates that energy that you have. And again, that's not necessarily a good or bad thing, it's just that's what it is. So um so that reveals a certain lesson. I know on my journey, that was my journey. I knew I had many past lives with this plant very intensely, so coming back to it was what it felt like a homecoming. But in my journey, it was a process of coming back to it, to see it, go through the karma with it, and then eventually, clear that and move on. That's how I perceived it now. So again, it's very individual to each person, right? So sure, of course we can, say all these things and, think what's good or bad, what's right or wrong, but the reality is like it's going to be very individual to each of us and on individual timing. You see? So yeah, that's kind of where I've come to with it. And it's just not, it's like a lot of these things I've been sharing recently, like about the moon, about psychedelics, about, like getting hyped on dates and like all these things. These are things that are very popular in the new age, like moon worship and the tantra scene and like all these things. Um, and
It all looks
yeah,
good on Instagram.
100%, right? It's exactly that. And I do feel like, yeah, it's a part of everyone's journey. Not everyone's journey, but it may be a part of a lot of people's journey to explore these things. In my view and in my personal experience, it was part of my own karmic elements where I was engaging in these things in ways that maybe I had to go through to clear. Maybe I had to come into a new level of relationship with them. Maybe I had to respect them in a new way, and understand that part of my journey in a different light, because that's really what this lifetime is for. It's a very unique period where the things that may have worked before and may have worked for like thousands and thousands of years, maybe that's no longer. Maybe we're it's shifting now, and that's kind of how I see a lot of these things, right? Which, yeah, is not so popular obviously to talk about, but uh it's kind of truth for me, and maybe for other people at a certain period. But yeah, it's a number. I will send you though the Dr. Jeer's podcast. He has a really nice presentation about it, and other things like C60 and monatomic gold, Ormus gold, which is kind of popular. And it's all similar. It's all kind of similar topics where, yeah, on one level there's some benefit, on another level maybe not. And it's just kind of seeing, well, what's what, right?
Yeah.
But again, it's like the meat discussion. It's like all these things where, sure, there may be some kind of ideal or some kind of vision, of what's possible. Like, oh, it can be breatharian, or you know what I mean? But like, how real is that for everybody? Like, or what, how practical is that right now? Like, does that, right? Um, but I just know, like, even beyond all these things, like for me personally, anything that alters my consciousness in a way that I don't feel like I have a real sense of clarity in on all respects of myself, which doesn't always mean that's the case with smoking some weed. You could still feel quite grounded. But if there's any way where I feel like my energies are being manipulated, like even people doing like energy healing on me and shit like that, none of that happens. And I'm not down with any of that, because I'll learn it myself. I'll figure it out. It's not that I'm not humble to people's like abilities. It's like, okay, well, whatever you're doing, just teach me what you're doing, or with the plant, whatever that's activating, well, how can I do this through my own natural self? Like, how am I able to do that, right? Because I know I can. And that was originally the kind of rationalization, I'm getting these reference points, which I was, but the reference points came at a cost, and the cost was more than if I would have just gone about it my own, like kind of in a more balanced way. Not like completely saying that I should have never done anything, that I don't view it that way,
Yeah.
but I certainly feel like there was a balance point that I crossed, and I feel like that balance point oftentimes is a lot, maybe less glamorous than what people wanna wanna admit about it, right?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so I mean, I understand obviously where you're like, it's your work, it's part of your life for a long time, and it's like a big topic. Not as a big topic, but it is certainly a part of your experience. So it's just exploring and seeing, what like maybe some of these things resonate, or they make sense to you. I just, yeah, I feel I'd never go back into it again. And a lot of things I wouldn't really at this from this vantage point now.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like, you know, you gotta you get to that point where it has to fall away, right? If something is pushed away or resisted, that's where you start to get into the challenge. You know, it's like working with there was an alcoholic that I worked with years ago, and you know, he's sober now and he's doing so great. And and I remember like the whole time, like I was just like, I'm not telling you to stop drinking. Like there's nothing about what I'm telling you to stop drinking. All I would like you to do is, and then I would get him to like, oh, just maybe meditate before your drink, or just take a moment to breathe before you take your next drink. And you know, like all these like small steps, and then over time, you know, it just kind of dissolves, right?
Hmm.
So that's because it's like if you're doing something to make yourself feel in a certain way, well then obviously there's some natural desire there where you feel like you could feel better than what you are, or feel, you know, in a more content, peaceful space. So it's whatever thing's going to get you there, and then we're kind of just like exchanging tools to be able to get us to that place, and then the other tools kind of just naturally fall away. And that's how I see it now, where you know, my life is just very consistently in a nice place. So those things just kind of they don't come across my mind, right? Versus previous periods, it was definitely not the case, right? So, you know, yeah, that's my long-winded answer.
Lot of information there. No,
Yeah.
that's good. No, I appreciate that. I've recently discovered and been watching a lot of Sadhguru videos
Mm,
on YouTube. So one of them was the ayahuasca and the cost of that, and perhaps seeing, you know, if you see these higher dimensions and you have to come back down into your body, isn't that suffering?
mm,
You know, isn't knowing that you know that is up there and you are down here, isn't that doesn't isn't that a cost or something like that, you know? It's I thought that was interesting. He
mm.
also has pushed me to a much more vegetarian diet. Like just hearing someone say, "Don't consume anything that feels emotions," I was like, ah.
Totally.
I was like, okay, I get it now. And I was having a couple experiences where like I took a couple days off from eating meat, and then I would try eating meat, and I would like kind of try to be aware of the emotions that came out after that. And I found like very much like I would have these pop-ups of sort of like aggressive thoughts,
Mm,
or like uh what's the term, just I mean anything under a negative to like, you know, potentially like a sad thought or like a vindictive thought or something like that. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. Like I guess I never really realized that before. But like, you know, when I eat these vegetarian meals, not only does my body digest it better and I feel better for it, but I'm having much more positive states of mind come out after that.
mm. Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, I totally relate with that for sure. I mean, that's cool. That's awesome that you're looking at that. Yeah, he's on point with his practical, his very like grounded ways of explaining things, you know. Um, but I mean, especially in that, and then you know, like the other element I know he mentioned about the marijuana piece is like anytime you're smoking, you know, like it's really staying in your system for quite a while, right? And that was pretty eye opening for me earlier in my journey when I was kind of like wanting to release from it, and then I started noticing that like I would go back to it, and it would go back to it like a year later, like 6 months later, you know what I mean? And it'd be like such a long period. But it kind of, and then, you know, you do it again, and then you have like kind of those repercussions for like quite a while.
Mhm.
And and the thing is, and it's even with the meat, you know, if I went back into salmon a couple of times over the past, you know, year or so, same thing, because even fish feel emotion in a certain degree. So like, you know, you eat it and you feel these like subtle layers because you know, you get so clean, or there's such an openness to your energy, and then you know, you take something in, and then there's kind of something there. I mean, in a certain sense, like with the meat topic's an interesting one. I think it's again such an individual thing, but when the body's ready to kind of let it go or go in another direction, yeah, like the levels of subtlety you start to connect to I mean, there's nothing that really can replace it, right? Like, I feel that's probably one of the most important elements on the journey, not even related to not doing this or not consuming that or doing this or consuming that. It's more just having a cognition of like the fullness of your energy body and your anatomy, like really, like even on the physical level, just being able to feel your organs, and kind of know what's up when something's off. You eat something and you feel it in your liver, or you feel it in your stomach or whatever. That's a cool thing. And then your chakras and your energy body and your auric field, like when you're in somebody's aura that is kind of really, I don't know, in a different space, let's say.
Mhm.
And you could really start to feel that kind of sense, that ability to have like true expanded sensation. Oh man, it's such a powerful thing to cultivate, because that's the guidepost, right? It's not like a external guru or whatever. Like that can, we can have teachers and guides, but really, like, we have to be able to sense in our bodies how we interact with things, and what does it mean to interact with something, right? And I mean, this is the journey you're on, obviously, but it just continues to expand in its level of subtlety. Because even, like, let's say, like the entity discussion, that was one thing, like the podcast I did with Ollie, he asked me that question and I gave a small answer, but I'm going to expand on it because I know a lot of people are going to ask that same question. It's like, well, how do I know that there's entities or energies or whatever? And it's, as much as it's very much like a knowing, like you will know, you'll be able to sense it, right? But that has to be developed in a certain sense, so like you can really be able to almost perceive them, like see it, just like you would see someone like walking into your room unannounced,
Mhm.
and be like, well, why are, I didn't ask you to come or whatever, like, why are you here? And then it's the same thing with the energy field, where being able to have that expanded cognition, these questions start to answer themselves, because you're like, oh, well, if I don't know, smoke a joint, and then all of a sudden I start to see like things open up, or things start to interact more, or like these ayahuasca journeys where everyone's like, oh, I met all these beings and all these beings came to me and all this shit. And I'm like, well, fuck, like, is that how you want shit? Like, you want people rolling up in your field, like, just unannounced kind of thing? It's like, I certainly don't want that.
Yeah.
Um, right. So it's when you start to know, when you can start to perceive that, and you have a certain, like, boundary, I guess, is the common term people use. Like, you know your boundaries, or you just know, like, what's yours and what's another, what's your space and what's somebody else's space. There's such a power to that, because that's how we navigate our experience, in this realm, right? Of like, we want people in our space or don't, and we have a certain awareness as to what, when we get too caught up in other people's energies, especially as a projector manifester. These are kind of the things that I think are really, really, like, really nice to have, cultivated and over time. And that's pretty privy to the conversation you brought about synchronicity, because it is kind of like that, right? It's just keeping awareness with everything, like everything you interact with. Well, how does that feel? Like, what, and it'll be pretty obvious, more and more it'll be obvious, whether you consume a certain food, you know, engage in a certain substance, engage with a certain person, go to a certain environment, like in the city, in nature, like all these different interactions, you can really start to perceive these fields, because you're not numb to them anymore,
Mhm.
right? And it's like magnetic radiation or 5G. Most people don't think it's a big deal, but anyone who has any sort of like cognition of their fields, they can see the difference when they're just constantly around technology, or like it's constantly, versus you go in a forest, you can clearly see the difference, right? So sometimes it'll be more subtle, but the less numb you are, the more your fields are expanding, and as those fields are expanding, you're interacting with all the fields of everything else. So it's kind of like you're taking inventory now, of all these interactions, not necessarily always consciously, but that starts to kind of guide the flow, I guess, a little bit better, the trajectory of things. But yeah.
Yeah. I feel it. I feel it. I've been around people that, like, I start thinking things. I'm like, those aren't my thoughts.
Totally. Yeah.
I have to think for a second, like, why do I feel like shit right now? It's like, oh, that I didn't think that.
Yep.
That's something. from somewhere else.
Totally.
And just being able to at least, like, for me, it's just not feeding into those thoughts, like realizing that, it's that whole, like, energy, where the energy flows where attention goes,
Mm,
and just learning to sort of redirect my attention to a much more like positive state of being. And like, I feel like I've kicked depression right out the door, to be honest. I don't really have, I wake up, I'm in a good mood. I don't feel like, even through a pandemic, like I'm still feeling pretty hopeful about the future. Like, I'm trying to just let most things in the physical world just kind of fall away right now and just be in
mm,
my own little bubble.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
I
the
think
life.
that I've been trying to tell people, I feel like 2020 is kind of like a hurdle race, and like everything on the outside being perceived is like a hurdle you have to jump over, but you have to stay consistent on the inside. It's all about maintaining the flow on the inside.
Mm,
Like, everything possible has been thrown at us on the outside, and it's like the people that were like the weakest emotionally lost out on the first hurdle, and then it's like either life was going to kick your ass or like push you in a direction to start making yourself better. And it's like, I feel like I'm still going. The hurdles can keep coming. I'm good. Like, let's just make it through, with a smile on our face at least. So yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
through that. Yeah, I feel you. That's awesome, man. It's good to hear.
Yeah. Well, it's what time is that? That's 10:30. That's
Yeah.
about an hour right there. Um, what's our closing notes today? Should I how do I go look into my lineage, if I and see where my bloodline's from?
Well, it's not so much of a cut and dry answer. I mean, I think it's just a continual deepening into some of the KS stuff. So I think I sent you that document. I don't know if you read it. It's like a PDF, like it was like a summarized version of like the teachings. I don't know. Did I
Yeah, it
send?
was like a single page document going through like the 12D or the 12.
Yeah, I think I did say that. So I can start opening up the database to you, um, and uh, and yeah, I'll start opening up the database to you, and then I'll like some of the workshops, we'll start to kind of dive in because it's a very vast discussion. I mean, I'm still, endlessly uncovering within myself, right, of what I don't know, like everything. There's so many kind of sides to that coin, right? Of what different race lines you've been at certain periods, the coding you're coming into now with, certain places in the universe you may be connected to. It really is a
It's
vast
a
kind of,
vast topic.
yeah. It's kind of like if you didn't remember where you grew up, um, and say, I mean, it's a pretty extreme example, but if you didn't remember where you grew up, or say you're like an orphan,
Yeah.
and you don't know where you're from, you don't know where you grew up. It's like you can't really go ask anybody. There's not really a set workshop or something you could do to remember. I mean, there would be workshops to tell you, okay, this is the steps to take to kind of like find your birth mom, or you know, find, you know what I mean? Like there would be like that. That's kind of the KS thing. It's like it shows you,
Yeah.
okay, these are the examples. These are potentially where you're from, but then the actual exploration into it, holy shit, that's a whole other
Yeah.
discussion. But the beauty is it's very possible. And I mean, the KS community is very unique because I mean, I obviously have come across many people in the new age, remember past lives, or know where they're from, and have a cognition of why they're here. In the KS community, it's like it's very much like that. It's not a big community. They're not very like prominent figures. But some of these people, like the claims of who they are in the past, and not like claims like they're out there like telling everyone I'm Jesus or something like that. It's like they're to themselves, so you can kind of trust in their humility a bit. Um, but the amount of people that have these cognitions of where they're from, like very clear memories of where they've been and why they've come here, it kind of just a testament to the teachings. That's what I see. I'm like, well, if everybody here is kind of in the know, like
Mhm.
there's something there, right? So that's just been motivation for me to continue to uncover, and I've uncovered many aspects of, you know, my lineage. Sometimes it's very nuanced, you know, like where you have a certain feeling, you may not be able to like put on your mind like some sort of like clear certainty, but there's a knowing that, oh yeah, like I have a memory from this planet, or you know, I have a sense of this lineage, right? And again, like just like the synchronicities with the numbers, as you're coming into a balanced flow with it, where you're not, you know, jumping at the rafters because of this or that, you know, like you're keeping it in some sort of mindful way, then I mean there's a real power there, right? Because you'll start to piece together the puzzle. So I mean, like you said, you know, like now that the when the question is asked, usually the answers are like on the way. So I'll yeah, I'll start just sending you some initial things. You can start exploring the workshops and see what comes of it.